5 men circled her in Calloway Park like they had already won. The largest one grabbed her medical bag and threw it into the fountain. The youngest one had his phone out, laughing, filming. They thought they had found the easiest target in Delford, a quiet nurse in scrubs who smelled like antiseptic and looked like she'd apologize for breathing. What none of them knew, what nobody in this city knew, was that the woman standing calmly in the center of that circle had once walked into professional MMA cages across 7 states and walked out undefeated every single time. She had buried that life, but they were about to dig it up themselves. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to my channel right now and follow every part until the end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The shift had been brutal, the kind that left you staring at the hospital ceiling tiles during a break and forgetting what you were supposed to be doing next. Mara Voss had worked 11 hours straight in the emergency department at Delford Central Medical, and by the time she clocked out at 4:30, her feet were already sending complaints up both legs. She didn't go straight home. She never did on Saturdays. Calloway Park sat about 6 blocks northeast of the hospital, and on weekends it ran a community health clinic out of 2 white pop-up tents near the old Fountain Plaza. The program had started 3 years ago through a nonprofit partnership with the city, and Mara had been volunteering with it since month 2. It wasn't required. Nobody asked her to come. She just kept showing up because the people who lined up at those tents, older residents who couldn't easily travel, parents with kids and no insurance, adults who hadn't seen a doctor in years, they needed someone, and Mara knew how to be that person. She changed out of her hospital scrubs in the locker room and put on a clean set she kept in her bag for Saturdays. Wore her Delford Central badge because it helped people trust her faster when they were nervous. Grabbed her personal kit, blood pressure cuff, pulse ox, glucose strips, a few pens, her intake forms, and walked the 6 blocks in the late afternoon light. The park was busy. It usually was on warm Saturdays. People had set up along the path near the playground, and there was a food vendor near the south entrance who sold fresh fruit cups and always saved Mara 2 with extra lime because he knew she'd be there. His name was Felix, and he was 63, and Mara had caught his borderline hypertension early enough the previous summer that he still considered her personally responsible for his continued existence, which she always deflected by telling him it was the fruit cups. She set up at the second tent alongside Dorothy Hale, a retired nurse who volunteered every weekend and had the kind of calm efficiency that made Mara feel like she was still learning her job, even after 7 years in emergency medicine. Dorothy had already organized the intake stack and had a line forming. "You're 7 minutes late," Dorothy said without looking up. "I'm not late. I'm arriving with context," Mara said. They worked the next 2 hours steadily. Mara saw 14 people, checked blood pressures, went over a teenager's inhaler technique, talked a retired postal worker through his confusing discharge paperwork from a hospital visit the week before, and sat for 20 minutes with an 81-year-old woman named Constance Briggs, who had questions about her new medication and really just wanted someone to listen. Mara listened. She asked about Constance's daughter, who lived in a different state. She asked about the cats. None of it was dramatic. None of it looked like much from the outside. But that was how Mara liked things. Around 6:15, the line had thinned. Dorothy was packing the blood pressure cuffs and chatting with a young mother waiting for her daughter to finish her popsicle. Mara was at the table writing up the last intake sheet when she first heard the voice. It was the kind of loud that wasn't accidental, the kind calibrated for an audience. "Look at this setup. What is this, a school project?" She glanced up. 4 young men had stopped on the path about 20 feet from the tent, and a 5th was walking a few steps ahead of the others, the one who had spoken. He was maybe 24, 25, wearing an expensive-looking jacket that was too warm for the weather. He had the relaxed confidence of someone who had never been told no by anything that mattered. Mara recognized the type before she'd ever known his name. His name, she would learn later, was Garrett Wills, the son of Conrad Wills, who owned Wills Property Group and had his face on bus stop ads all over Delford and had donated enough to the city council that his name was on a wing of the public library no one could explain how he'd funded. Garrett had grown up understanding that consequence was something that happened to other families. He walked closer to the tent, looking at the setup with an expression like he'd found something mildly funny. "You guys licensed for this?" he said. "Because this looks like it might be illegal." "It's fully permitted," Dorothy said. Her voice was even. She had been a nurse for 31 years. She did not frighten easily. Yeah, I'm not asking you, sweetheart. He looked at Mara. Are you the person in charge? Mara set down her pen. We're a licensed community health clinic. Delford City permit. Numbers on the board. Is there something I can help you with medically? He laughed like she'd said something stupid. His friends spread out slightly, not in any organized way, but in the way of people who had done this before, positioning themselves for maximum spectator effect. I mean, you could help me by packing this up. We use this part of the park on weekends. The park is public, Mara said. Yeah, but there's a difference between public and, He gestured vaguely at the tent, at the intake forms, at the patients still sitting in the plastic chairs. This. She held his look for a second, then went back to writing. She didn't say anything else. Not because she was afraid, but because she had learned a long time ago that engaging certain people was like trying to fill a leaking cup. The effort cost you everything and produced nothing. Garrett didn't like being dismissed. He walked up to the table and picked up one of her intake forms, looking at it the way someone looks at junk mail before throwing it away. These people could just go to a real doctor, Some of them can't afford to, Mara said, still writing. Not my problem. No, she agreed. It's not. He dropped the form on the ground. Not on the table. On the ground. Constance Briggs, still sitting in the chair from her consultation, started to stand. She was 81 and moved carefully. Young man, Constance said. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to not, he said, and the way he said it made Constance go still. That was the first thing that shifted something in Mara. She put the pen down for real this time. Okay, she said. You should leave now. Or what? The question hung there, pointed and lazy at the same time. His friends had moved closer. One of them, a heavy-set guy with a shaved head and a diamond stud earring, had his phone out, filming. Mara looked at the phone, then at Garrett. Or the park security patrol comes through in about 4 minutes, she said. And everything you've done so far is on 3 different cameras. She pointed to the city camera mounted on the light post at the edge of the fountain plaza, then to the small security camera on the front of the permit board, then, because it was true, to a man walking a golden retriever near the path who had his phone angled in their direction and had been recording for the last 90 seconds. Garrett's jaw tightened. He looked at the cameras. He looked at her. He looked at his friends, and something moved across his face. Recalibration. The calculation of someone deciding whether this was worth it in public view. You're really not worth my time, he said. I know, she said. He turned and walked back toward the path, and his friends followed. The heavy-set one pointed his camera at Mara as he left. The others smirked. Dorothy exhaled slowly. Nice bluff, Dorothy said quietly. Security does come through at 6:20, Mara said. Yes, but those cameras on the permit board, the one on the board is real. The city one is real. The guy with the dog was just walking his dog. She picked up her pen again. 2 out of 3. Dorothy looked at her. Most people would have been shaking. I grew up with 4 older brothers, Mara said. You learned to read the room fast. That was true. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. They finished packing up at 7. Felix came over and helped carry the folding table to Dorothy's car. Constance Briggs waited until everyone else had gone before she touched Mara's arm. That young man, Constance said. He's done this before. There's a family that sells fresh herbs near the east entrance. He ran them off last month. Told them the park wasn't a marketplace. They were permitted? Mara asked. Of course they were. Constance looked tired. His father plays golf with the park commissioner. Mara helped Constance to her car, then walked back through the park toward the exit on her own. The evening light was doing that thick gold thing it did in summer, the kind that made everything look more important than it was. Pigeons moved around the fountain. A couple of teenagers were skateboarding near the walkway. She thought about what Constance had said, about the family that sold herbs, about the park commissioner, about how Garrett Wills had said we use this part of the park like ownership was a thing you inherited rather than earned. She'd met men like that before, in the cage mostly, the ones who walked in with their record printed on their face like a permanent expression, the ones who started every fight already certain of the ending. They were usually the ones who landed hardest. She stopped herself. That was a different version of her life. That door had been locked for 6 years. She kept walking. The incident at the park didn't stay in the park. By Tuesday morning, Mara arrived at Delford Central Medical to find a message from administration in her inbox. The subject line said, "Concern raised, community event conduct." She read it twice before she understood what it was. Someone had filed a formal complaint against her with the hospital. The complaint alleged that a Delford Central staff member, identified by badge, had engaged in aggressive and threatening behavior toward members of the public at Calloway Park on Saturday evening. It mentioned potential liability for the hospital. It mentioned the volunteer program. It asked for a review of her conduct and a meeting with department administration. It was signed by an attorney at a firm called Holt, Wills and Prescott. Wills. Mara sat in the break room with her coffee going cold and read the document a third time. Then she sent a copy to Dorothy and called the community clinic's nonprofit director, a man named Owen Park, who had run the program for 6 years and had been through enough with city bureaucracy to sound only mildly alarmed. "How much of it is accurate?" Owen asked. "He came to the tent. He was hostile to volunteers and patients. I asked him to leave. He left." "Did you threaten him?" "I told him park security patrolled the area." Silence on the line. "Mara, you know how this works," Owen said. "It doesn't matter what happened. It matters what they can make it look like." She knew. She had known since the moment she'd seen the name on the complaint. Conrad Wills didn't send a letter from his family's law firm because his son came home with hurt feelings. He sent it because someone had told his son no in public, and the son had needed to restore the family's sense of the natural order. The meeting with hospital administration was scheduled for Thursday. In the meantime, Mara worked her shifts. She triaged, she stabilized, she spent 20 minutes with a 9-year-old boy who was terrified of his IV and needed someone to talk about soccer until he forgot the needle was there. She did her job. She didn't talk about the complaint, but the complaint talked about her. By Wednesday, 2 of her colleagues had asked her quietly if she was okay. Her charge nurse, a woman named Bevins, stopped by her station in the afternoon with a face that said, "I've heard something," and a voice that said, "I'm not sure how to ask about it." "Everything all right?" Bevins said. "Fine," Mara said. "How's your patient in 4? "Mara. His oxygen's been a little low all morning." Bevins let it go. The meeting on Thursday was held in a conference room on the 3rd floor that smelled like copy paper and forced neutrality. There were 3 people across the table from Mara: the hospital's patient relations coordinator, a woman named Sandra Fitch, who spoke in careful, complete sentences, the director of community programs, a man named Dr. Carl Emmett, who had never once attended the Saturday clinic, but whose name was listed as its hospital liaison, and a human resources representative who took notes and never made eye contact. The complaint had grown. Garrett Wills, it appeared, had provided the hospital with video footage. The footage, shot by his friend with the phone, showed a segment of the interaction. It showed Mara standing at the table with her arms crossed. It showed her speaking. It showed Garrett walking away. What it didn't show was how the interaction started. What it cut out entirely was Garrett picking up the intake form and dropping it on the ground. What it had been trimmed to suggest, very deliberately, was a confrontational clinic volunteer escalating a casual encounter. "We're not saying the complaint is substantiated," Sandra Fitch said carefully. "We're saying we have an obligation to take it seriously." "What does that mean in practice?" Mara asked. Dr. Emmett cleared his throat. "It means we'd like you to step back from the volunteer program while we complete our review." "For how long?" "We're not in a position to give you a timeline." "Has anyone from the hospital looked at the park camera footage?" A pause. Sandra Fitch and Dr. Emmett exchanged a look she wasn't meant to catch, but did. "We haven't had the opportunity to request that yet," Fitch said. "I'd like you to," Mara said. "The footage would be very clarifying." "We'll look into it," Emmett said, in the way people say they'll look into things when they've already decided the looking won't be necessary. She walked out of that meeting and stood in the hallway for a moment, hand flat against the wall, looking at the industrial carpet. She wasn't angry. Anger was useful in controlled amounts and corrosive in large ones. She'd learned that before she ever learned anything about medicine. What she felt was something colder and more specific. It was the feeling of recognizing that the problem was real, that it was organized, and that it was going to get worse before anyone moved to make it better. She was right on all 3 counts. By Friday, the edited video had appeared on a local social media page called Delford Community Watch, a page that, if you looked at its 4-year post history, functioned mainly as a place where people complained about parking and sometimes shared lost pet notices. Someone had posted the clip with a caption that read, "Aggressive volunteer at Calloway Park, intimidating residents. Is this who we want representing our hospitals?" It had 400 shares by noon. Mara found out about it because a patient's family member recognized her from the thumbnail and mentioned it to a nurse in radiology, who mentioned it to Bevins, who came to find Mara in the supply room with a face that no longer said, "I've heard something," and now said, "This is happening." "I saw it," Mara said before Bevins could speak. "You don't look—" "I'm fine." "Mara, you don't have to—" "I know." She picked up a box of gloves in the wrong size and put it back. "I know I don't have to be fine, but I have 4 more hours on this shift, and 2 patients who need me present, and the clip is edited. The park camera saw the whole thing." "Have you talked to anyone? A lawyer, maybe?" She had not. She had $312 in her personal account that wasn't spoken for by rent and student loan payments. Attorney fees were not a thing she could absorb right now. "I'm working on it," she said, which was the first thing she'd said all week that wasn't entirely true. She went back to her patients. The afternoon unraveled in pieces. She was pulled into a trauma bay at 3 o'clock when a construction worker came in with a crush injury to his left hand, and she worked alongside the attending physician for 90 minutes without thinking about anything except the wound, the bleeding, the right order of interventions. That was what she loved about emergency medicine. It had a way of making everything else temporarily irrelevant. The work was the only thing. At 5:15, she was charting at the nurse's station when her phone buzzed. The message was from Dorothy, the family from the herb stand. "Did you know they're in the park every Saturday?" Then, a minute later, Garrett was there again this afternoon, cornered the daughter. "She's 17. Mara set down her pen. She read the message again. Cornered. A 17-year-old girl. At a public park. In the afternoon. She felt something in her chest shift. Not anger, not exactly. Something that had been lying very still for a very long time. She typed back, "Is she okay?" Dorothy. "Shaken. Father called police. Officer came, took a report. Nothing else." Mara. "Was she hurt?" Dorothy. "No, but he got close. He said things." A pause. Then Dorothy again. "He told her she didn't belong here. He said the park belonged to people like him. He said he was going to make sure of it." Mara put the phone in her pocket. She finished charting. She finished her shift. She changed out of her scrubs and packed her bag. She walked 6 blocks to Calloway Park in the blue-gray evening. The Herb family's stand was still set up near the east entrance. A folding table with labeled bundles of thyme, rosemary, cilantro, lemon basil. The father was packing slowly, moving with the care of someone whose hands were shaking slightly. The daughter, dark-haired and about the age Mara had been when she first started training, was sitting on a bench nearby, staring at the ground. Mara introduced herself. She asked if she could sit. The daughter's name was Sophia. She was 17. When Mara asked gently what had happened, Sophia looked up with the expression of someone who had been told by an authority figure that what happened wasn't serious enough to matter, and was now deciding whether to believe that. "He came up when my dad was getting change for a customer," Sophia said. "Just started talking, like not yelling or anything, quiet. It was worse because he was quiet about it." She paused. "He said this was his park. He said people like us set up here because we didn't have anywhere else to go, and that he was going to make sure we stopped coming. He said—" She stopped. "You don't have to," Mara said. "He said if my dad made a problem about it, it would be the last stand he set up anywhere in Delford." Sophia's father had come over at some point during this. He was maybe 50, with the kind of stillness in his face of someone who had decided not to react in the moment and was now not sure what to do with everything he'd held in. "The officer was polite," he said, "but she said without physical contact, it's very difficult to do anything. He said nothing that could be—" He searched for the word, "classified." Mara nodded. She stayed with them for 20 minutes. She helped carry the table to their car. She gave Sophia's father her number and asked him to call her if it happened again. When she walked back through the park, her hands were very still at her sides. She sat down on a bench by the fountain, the same fountain where Garrett's friends had laughed on Saturday. The park was mostly empty now. A man jogged past. Somewhere farther in, kids were playing. She looked at the city camera on the light post. She thought about the footage that hospital administration hadn't bothered to request yet. She thought about the complaint filed on Will's family letterhead. She thought about Sophia's face, not frightened exactly, worn. 17 years old and already wearing the expression of someone who had learned that the people who were supposed to help often didn't. Mara had worn that expression once, briefly, a long time ago. She'd had people who trained it out of her, not by telling her the world was fair, but by handing her something better, the precise, specific knowledge of what she was capable of when it counted. She pulled out her phone and searched for the contacts she hadn't called in over 3 years. The name sat in her contacts under Kay Draskovich, training, Kira Draskovich, who had coached Mara through 6 years of competition, who had seen her at her worst, at her most exhausted, at her most certain she couldn't continue, who had a gym on the east side of Delford that Mara had never visited since she'd hung up the gloves. She stared at the name. She didn't call. Not yet. But she didn't put the phone away either, and she sat there by the fountain in the deepening dark, the park camera watching the empty path, the footage from Saturday still sitting on a city server that nobody had looked at yet. Footage that showed everything Garrett Wills needed to not be seen. And somewhere across the city, in an office with a view of the Delford skyline, a man was looking at the viral clip numbers climbing and deciding that one quiet nurse in a public park had become a problem worth finishing. He was wrong about what she was. I was about to find that out. He was wrong about what she was. He was about to find that out. That thought didn't leave her as she walked home. It sat in the back of her mind like a splinter she kept pressing with her thumb. Not quite pain, but present enough to remind her it was there. She made rice and didn't taste it. She sat on the edge of her couch and watched the city through her window for a while, the Delford skyline doing its usual indifferent thing against the dark, all lit windows and indistinct noise from 3 floors down. She pulled out her phone and looked at Kira Draskovich's number again. She put the phone down. She picked it up. She put it down again. Then she opened her laptop and looked up the Delford Community Watch page instead, because she needed to understand the scope of what she was dealing with before she decided anything else. The post was still up, 640 shares now. The comments were the predictable split. Some people saying the video proved nothing. Some people saying it was exactly the kind of thing that gave volunteers a bad name. Some people just there to be angry about something. One comment near the top had 47 likes and said, "This woman works at Delford Central. Someone should make sure they know what their staff is doing on weekends." Someone already had. Mara closed the laptop. She didn't sleep well. She woke at 5 with the particular clarity of someone whose brain had kept working while the rest of her was pretending to rest. And she lay in the gray pre-dawn working through what she actually knew versus what she was assuming. What she knew: Garrett Wills had come to the clinic tent and been hostile. The confrontation had been filmed selectively. His family's attorney had filed a complaint with her employer within 72 hours. The hospital had convened a meeting and removed her from the volunteer program pending review. The video had been posted publicly. A 17-year-old girl had been intimidated at the same park 2 days later. The police had come and done nothing actionable. What she was assuming, that this was orchestrated, that the pace of it was intentional, and that it wasn't going to stop on its own. By 6:15, she was dressed. By 6:30, she was in the hospital cafeteria with bad coffee and her intake paperwork from Saturday's clinic spread out in front of her, writing out a timeline on the back of a blank consent form in her neat, close handwriting. She had always thought better on paper. Something about committing words to a physical surface made them stop circling. She was still there when Owen Park called at 7:08. "I've been talking to the nonprofit's legal advisor," Owen said. He sounded like he'd also been awake most of the night. "She says we have a solid case for defamation if we can show the video was deliberately edited to misrepresent what happened." "It was," Mara said. "The park camera has the full sequence." "Has anyone pulled that footage yet?" "I asked the hospital to. They said they'd look into it." A silence that communicated exactly how Owen felt about that phrase. "I'm going to contact the City Parks Department directly," he said. "The footage is retained for 30 days on the municipal server. We have time, but not a lot." "Do it today," she said. "Mara, I also want to say, whatever happens with the hospital review, the program isn't going to throw you under anything. You've been with us since the beginning. Dorothy filed a written account last night with everything she saw. The volunteer who was with us in the first tent did too. She hadn't known that. She held it for a second. "Tell Dorothy thank you," she said. "Tell her yourself. She's already emailing the park's commissioner. After she hung up, she sat with her coffee for another few minutes. The cafeteria filled up around her, hospital staff coming on shift, a few patients' families with the particular hollow look of people who had been awake in waiting rooms. A man in a heavy coat asked if the seat across from her was taken, and she said no, and he sat down and ate a bagel and didn't say anything else, and for some reason that was exactly what she needed. Just another person in the same room, both of them tired, neither of them pretending it was something other than what it was. She went upstairs and started her shift. The rumor found her by mid-morning. She heard it the way you usually hear things in hospitals. Not directly, not to her face, but through the specific acoustic architecture of a busy department where information traveled in angles. She was restocking in Bay 3 when she caught two words from a conversation happening just around the partition, her record. She kept moving. She stalked. She listened. The voice was a nurse she didn't know well, a man named Paulson from the third floor who had no particular reason to be down in emergency. He was talking to someone she couldn't see. He was saying something about a background, about something that had come up, about how apparently there was more to the park situation than the video. Mara walked around the partition. Paulson stopped mid-sentence. The person he'd been talking to, an orderly she recognized but didn't know by name, suddenly found something very important to do in the other direction. "Sorry," Mara said, not sorry at all. "I caught a piece of that." "What record?" Paulson had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was just saying what I heard." "What did you hear?" He shifted his weight. "That someone had looked into you, after the complaint, that there was... I heard something about a fighting background, like professional fighting." She looked at him for a moment without speaking. "Who told you that?" she said. "It was just... someone mentioned it. In passing, I don't know where it started." She held his look until he stopped fidgeting, then said, "If you're going to repeat something about a coworker, you might want to know where it came from first," and walked back toward her station. She sat down at the computer and logged into her charting with hands that were perfectly steady, which took a specific kind of effort she was not going to acknowledge. 6 years. She had been at Delford Central for 6 years. In 6 years, no one, not one person, had connected her to the name she'd carried in a different life. She'd used her middle name professionally during her entire fighting career. Different city, different world. She hadn't been hiding exactly, but she hadn't been advertising it either. Some part of her had just assumed that the distance she'd put between those two versions of herself was enough. Someone had crossed that distance. Someone had looked. The question was whether this was Garrett's initiative or his father's. The answer, she suspected, was that it didn't matter. The effect was the same either way. Her past was going to be used as a weapon in the present. She pulled up the City Parks Department website, found the public records request form, and submitted a formal request for the Calloway Park camera footage from the previous Saturday between 5 and 8 p.m. She logged it, saved the confirmation number, forwarded it to Owen. Then she texted Kira Draskovich. Not a call, a text. Because she still wasn't sure what she was doing, and a text gave her more control over how it started. "It's Mara. I need to talk to someone who knows the whole picture. Can we meet?" She sent it before she could reconsider, and then locked her phone in her locker and went back to work. Kira replied at noon. "My gym, 6 p.m. I'll have the coffee on." Mara finished her shift at 5:30, took the long way across the city on foot because she needed the transition, and arrived at Draskovich Combat Sports on the east side at 6:03. The building was a converted auto repair shop with a hand-lettered sign and mats she could see through the front window under fluorescent light. She had driven past this gym twice in the past year and not stopped. She told herself she was busy. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Kira was 51, Polish-American, short and solid, with gray coming through her dark hair and the eyes of someone who had professionally assessed human beings for 3 decades. She had trained collegiate wrestlers and professional fighters and one Olympic hopeful, and she had pulled Mara out of the worst year of her life and handed her something to put her energy into that wasn't destruction. When Mara walked in, Kira looked at her the way she always looked at people. A quick full-body scan that lasted about half a second and registered everything. "You look tired," Kira said. "I'm fine," Mara said. Kira handed her a coffee. "Tell me," Mara told her. "All of it. The park, the clinic, the complaint, the video." The meeting with hospital administration, what Paulson had said that morning. Kira listened without interrupting, which was one of her qualities that Mara had always valued and occasionally found unsettling because it meant you had to keep talking until you'd actually said the real thing. Someone's been looking into me, Mara said at the end. My history, the fighting, and they're spreading it through the hospital. Kira turned her coffee cup in her hands. Spreading it how? As a threat, like she has a fighting background. The implication being that makes the video credible, that I'm volatile. And you want to know how to get ahead of it. I want to know if there's anything in my record that they can use to make that stick. Kira looked at her. Your record was 14-0. Every fight was clean. One formal complaint in 6 years, and it was filed by a promoter who wanted you to take a fixed match and you refused. He withdrew it when he realized we had records of the conversation. Mara had not remembered the complaint. She hadn't thought about it in years. So nothing, she said. Nothing. But Mara… Kira paused. That's not why you texted me. Mara looked at her coffee. The girl at the park, Mara said. She's 17. Her family runs a little herb stand. Completely legal, permitted, harmless. This guy backed her into a corner and told her they didn't belong here. She stopped. I keep thinking about her face. Because it reminded you of something. Because it reminded me of someone. She meant herself, at 17, in a different kind of corner. She did not say this directly. Kira already knew. What are you going to do? Kira asked. I'm going to get the park footage pulled. I'm going to work the legitimate channels until they've run out or worked. And if they run out? Mara looked up. Then I figure out what comes next. Kira studied her. You know what I always said about the cage? Several things. I always said the most dangerous person in any fight isn't the one who's the angriest. It's the one who knows exactly how much they're capable of and hasn't needed to use it yet. She set down her cup. You've been holding a lot of capable for 6 years. I'm not saying go start a fight. I'm saying the man underestimating you is making the same mistake every opponent you ever had made. Don't correct him before it costs him. Mara was quiet for a moment. I just want my clinic back, she said. I know. Kira stood, picked up both cups. But I don't think that's all that's going to need fixing. She was right about that, too. The call from the hospital came on Monday morning, 40 minutes before Mara's shift started. It was Dr. Emmett. His voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering a decision they had prepared in advance and did not want to improvise around. Mara, I want to follow up on our meeting. After additional review of the complaint and a pause. Other relevant information that's come to the hospital's attention, administration has decided that pending the conclusion of the formal review, we'll need to adjust your role. Adjust how? She said. You'll be moved to a non-patient-facing administrative function for the duration of the review period. She stood very still in her kitchen. You're pulling me from patient care, she said. It's a temporary administrative reassignment. We want to be thorough and What's the additional relevant information? Another pause, this one longer. I'm not in a position to discuss the specific details at this. Dr. Emmett, she kept her voice level. I have been at Delford Central for 6 years with a clean record. I have never had a disciplinary action. I have never had a patient complaint. The information in the filed complaint is false, and I have submitted a formal request for security footage that will demonstrate that. What is the additional information? A silence. There were concerns raised about your background, he said finally, specifically about a prior history in professional fighting and whether that history is relevant to the incident at the park. My prior career is not a disciplinary matter. We understand that, but with the public attention the situation has received, you're making a personnel decision based on a viral video that was deliberately edited by the person who filed the complaint against me. Mara, is there anything else? She said. A beat. We'll be in touch with the formal documentation. She hung up. She sat at her kitchen table for exactly 4 minutes. She counted, because that was something Kira had taught her once. When everything is moving too fast, count to something. Hold still for a defined amount of time. Then move. At minute 5, she called a number she'd looked up the previous night, the Delford Nursing Association's legal advocacy line. She had never called it before. She had paid into it through her professional dues for 6 years without expecting she'd need it. The person who answered was named Tricia, and she was efficient and calm and asked good questions, and said that based on what Mara described, there were potentially actionable issues around the reassignment, and she would have someone contact Mara within the day. That was something. She went to the hospital, reported to the administrative office on the 4th floor, and spent 7 hours doing data entry on patient feedback forms. The woman she was sharing the space with was kind enough to not ask questions. Mara worked steadily and did not talk to anyone who wasn't necessary, and at lunch she sat by the window and ate the salad she'd brought and watched the parking lot below. Around 2 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed. Owen Park. The Parks Department confirmed the footage exists and is intact, he said, and she could hear the careful restraint of someone trying not to get excited before it was warranted. They've flagged it for our request. It should be accessible within 48 hours. Good, she said. There's something else. A pause. Dorothy got a call this morning from a woman who runs the local community legal clinic. She saw the post on Delford Community Watch and recognized Garrett Wills's name. Apparently there have been 2 prior complaints filed against him related to harassment at public spaces. Both were dropped. She's willing to provide documentation. Mara was quiet for a second. A pattern. Exactly. If this goes anywhere formal, it matters. After she hung up, she sat with that information and felt something shift slightly in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but the early shape of it. The sense that the pieces were not all against her, that some of them were slowly, steadily lining up. That afternoon ended without incident. The evening did not. She was walking to her car in the hospital garage at 6:20 when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her. "Is this the nurse?" a young voice said. "The one from the park?" She stopped walking. "Who is this?" "My name's Derek. I was there on Saturday. With Garrett." A pause. "I was the one with the phone." She did not say anything. "I filmed it," he said. His voice was doing something unsteady. "I know that. I filmed the whole thing, and then afterward Garrett took my phone and edited the clip before I could say anything. I want you to know that. I didn't put that video up." "Okay," she said carefully. "What are you telling me, Derek?" "I still have the original," he said. "On my phone. Garrett doesn't know. He only took my phone for like 10 minutes, and I think he thought he deleted it, but I had backed it up before he got my phone, like 20 minutes before when I thought it was just going to be a funny video." His voice dropped. "It's not funny." She stood in the garage in the oil-smelling dark, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "The original footage," she said. "It shows the whole interaction. Everything, from when we walked up, everything he did, everything he said." A longer pause. "He told us you were nobody, that this would be easy, that his dad would handle anything that came from it." Something shifted in Derek's voice, something harder and quieter. "Then I saw the thing about the girl, Sophia, or whatever her name is, and I looked up the Herb family, and they've been at that park for 3 years, and they're just," he stopped. "I'm not like him. I need you to know that. I went along with something I shouldn't have, and I've been trying to figure out what to do about it since Saturday." Mara thought about several things at once. About Derek's age, about the specific moral discomfort in his voice, about whether this was genuine and whether it mattered if it was, about what the original footage would mean for the park's request, and the hospital review and the public post, and the attorney's complaint. "I need you to preserve that footage exactly as it is," she said. "Don't edit anything. Don't send it to anyone yet. Don't delete it." "I know. I won't." "Do you have a lawyer? Or your parents?" "My parents don't know I was there," he said. Is there someone at your clinic thing, a legal person, someone I could talk to?" "Yes," she said. "His name is Owen Park, and I'm going to text you his number right now. Call him tonight if you can. Tell him exactly what you told me." "Okay." A breath. "Okay. I'm sorry. For being there. For the phone." "You're doing the right thing now," she said. It was the truth, and she meant it. She hung up and stood for a moment in the garage. The car 2 spaces over had a bumper sticker that said, "Delford Strong." A pipe dripped somewhere far above her. She texted Owen with Derek's first name and number and 3 words, "Call him tonight." Then she stood there another minute because she needed to think. If the original footage was what Derek said it was, the defamation claim against the Wills family became substantially easier. The hospital review changed. The public post on Delford Community Watch became a documented act of malicious editing. The attorney's letter became something a lawyer could tear apart in about an afternoon. It wasn't over. Not by a long measure. Conrad Wills had resources and patience and a family law firm and a park commissioner who golfed with him on weekends. But she had something now that she hadn't had 40 minutes ago. She drove home. She changed. She stood at her kitchen counter and ate leftovers without sitting down, her mind running logistics and contingencies with the focused efficiency of someone who had once studied opponents' footage for hours before every fight, mapping tendencies, finding the gap between what they thought they were doing and what they were actually doing. She knew how to wait for the right moment. She knew how to let someone else's aggression become their liability. She was still Mara Voss, RN, who brought extra blankets to patients and stayed late when families needed someone. That had not changed. That was not going anywhere. But underneath that, in the place she had kept very quiet for 6 years, something was awake again. Not anger, precision. She was washing her dish when her phone lit up with a message from a number she didn't have saved. No name. Just a text with 7 words. Stay away from the park. Last warning. She looked at the message for a long time. Then she screenshotted it, forwarded it to Owen, forwarded it to the Nursing Association's legal line, and opened a new note on her phone to begin documenting every contact, every incident, every timestamp she could account for from the beginning. She was still documenting at 11 p.m. At 11:43, Owen texted back. I spoke with Derek. He has the footage. I'm calling our legal advisor first thing in the morning. Mara. This changes things. She read it twice. Then she put the phone down, turned off the light, and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, because she knew it changed things. And she also knew that people with power and money and a law firm on speed dial didn't stop when things changed. They escalated. Tomorrow, she was almost certain, was going to be worse than today. She was right. At 7:06 the following morning, before she had finished her first coffee, a local news segment aired on Delford Channel 4. She saw it because Dorothy sent her the link. The segment lasted 4 minutes and featured a brief interview with Conrad Wills himself. Silver-haired, measured, wearing the expression of a man who had learned to perform concern, in which he described a troubling pattern of aggression in our city's public spaces, and mentioned, without naming her directly, a hospital employee who had a documented history of professional violence who had been involved in an incident at Calloway Park. He said it gently. That was the worst part. He said it like he was worried, like he was a civic-minded father who just wanted people to be safe. And somewhere across Delford, people who had never met Mara Voss were watching that 4-minute segment over morning coffee and deciding what kind of person she was before they ever had a reason to know. And somewhere across Delford, people who had never met Mara Voss were watching that 4-minute segment over morning coffee and deciding what kind of person she was before they ever had a reason to know. She watched the segment twice with her coffee going cold on the counter. The second time she watched it muted, just studying Conrad Wills's face, the careful blinks, the practiced pauses, the way he tilted his head slightly when he said troubling pattern, like he was genuinely burdened by it. He was good. She gave him that. He had probably done this kind of thing before, in boardrooms and city council presentations and donor dinners, this particular performance of reasonable concern that made aggression look like community service. She sent the link to the Nursing Association's legal line with a timestamp and a 3-sentence summary. Then she texted Kira. Watch Channel 4 segment from this morning. Conrad Wills. Kira replied 11 minutes later with a single word, careful. Mara knew what she meant, not careful as in retreat. Careful as in, they're watching for you to do something they can use. Don't give it to them. She got dressed and went to work. She sat at the administrative desk on the 4th floor and entered data into forms that didn't need her skills to complete, and she did it cleanly and without complaint, because the worst thing she could do right now was give anyone a reason to describe her behavior as difficult. She ate lunch alone. She answered her emails. She did not look at the Channel 4 comments section, which she had checked once and which had confirmed that the internet was populated by people with strong opinions and very little information. At 2:15, a woman appeared at the door of the administrative office. She was maybe 40, in a dark blazer, with the posture of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and being listened to. She introduced herself as Nadine Vance, attorney with the Delford Nursing Association's advocacy unit. She had driven from the other side of the city, and she wanted 45 minutes with Mara. They found an empty consultation room on the same floor. Nadine put a legal pad on the table and a recorder beside it and asked if Mara consented to being recorded for her own documentation purposes. Mara said yes. Nadine pressed record. "Tell me everything," Nadine said. "In order. Don't summarize. Details." So Mara did. She started from Saturday at the park and went forward in sequence, and Nadine wrote and occasionally asked short questions. What exact words did he use? What was the timestamp on the text? Did you save the confirmation number for the public records request? And the questions were good, the kind that showed someone who was building a structure rather than just collecting grievances. When Mara finished, Nadine looked at her notes for a moment. "The reassignment is the most actionable item right now," she said. "Pulling you from patient care without a clear documented clinical reason, during a review that's based on an unverified complaint, while simultaneously relying on information about your legal prior career as if it were relevant conduct. That's a real problem for them if they want to defend it." What does that mean in practice? It means I can file a formal objection to the reassignment within 24 hours and request a suspension of the review pending the outcome of the public records request for the park footage. It won't automatically reinstate you, but it creates a legal record that they moved against you without evidentiary basis. "Do it," Mara said. "There's also the news segment." Nadine tapped her pen on the pad. "He didn't name you, which was deliberate, but if we can demonstrate that the hospital acted within hours of the segment, that the reassignment timeline correlates to the segment's airing, we start building a picture of coordinated pressure." Mara thought about the timeline. The segment had aired at 7:06. She tried to remember when Emmett had called her. Monday morning, 40 minutes before her shift. She had arrived at 8. He'd called at 7:20. "The call from administration was 7:20, she said. "Segment aired at 7:06. Nadine looked at her. "You're sure?" "I was making coffee. I checked my phone when it rang because I didn't recognize the time. 7:20. Nadine wrote it down, underlined it twice. 14 minutes, she said quietly, more to herself than to Mara. Then she looked up. "Don't go to the park." "I know. Even if you want to. Even if someone asks you to. The text you received said last warning, which means whoever sent it is watching for a reason to escalate. Don't provide one." "I know," Mara said again. Nadine looked at her with the assessing expression that Mara was beginning to recognize, the one that meant the person across from her was recalibrating their initial read. "You're very calm," Nadine said. "Most people in this situation are all over the place by day 4. "I've been in high-pressure environments before," Mara said. "The fighting." "Among other things." Nadine made a small note. "I'm not asking about the fighting, but I want you to know. It's going to come up more. Now that Wills has flagged it publicly, even obliquely, journalists are going to start digging. How you handle the first person who asks you about it directly is going to matter. What do you recommend? Honest and brief. You had a career before nursing. It was legal. You left it. It has no bearing on your conduct at the park or your professional record at the hospital. Don't be defensive about it." "I'm not defensive about it." "Good." Nadine capped her pen. "One more thing. The young man, Derek, who has the original footage, Owen Park says he's willing to cooperate, but he's scared. His family doesn't know he was there." "I know." "We need that footage before anything else. Everything else we're building right now is scaffolding. The footage is the foundation." Mara thought about Derek's voice on the phone. 20-something, unsteady, doing the right thing badly, which was still doing the right thing. "He'll give it," she said. "He's more scared of what he did than of what it'll take to fix it." "I hope you're right." Nadine stood, gathered her things. "I'll file the objection tonight. Stay unremarkable between now and the footage." Mara almost smiled. "That's the plan." She stayed unremarkable for 41 hours. Then Calloway Park happened again, and this time Mara wasn't there to see it. Dorothy called at 6:40 Saturday morning, the following weekend, before Mara had left for the hospital. Her voice was different, not the brisk, efficient Dorothy of intake forms and blood pressure cuffs. Something harder and more frightened. "They destroyed the stand," Dorothy said. Mara sat up. "What?" "Sophia's family, the herb stand, last night, sometime after 11. Someone came through and overturned everything, the table, the containers, everything. Someone wrote something on the sidewalk next to where they set up. A pause. It wasn't vague. Was anyone there? Was anyone hurt? No. They found it this morning. The father called the police at 6. Dorothy's voice pulled in tight. Mara, the writing on the sidewalk. It said you were warned. She was out of bed before Dorothy finished the sentence, phone to her ear, pulling on clothes. Did they photograph it? She said. Yes. Police took photos. Has Owen been told? I'm calling him next. I wanted you to know first. Call him now. Call Nadine Vance. I'll text you her number. Tell both of them the exact words on the sidewalk, the time they found it, whether police are treating it as vandalism or something more serious. She was putting on her shoes. Are you okay? I'm fine, Dorothy said. I'm angry. So am I, Mara said. Stay that way. She texted Nadine before her first coffee hit. She texted Owen. She texted Kira the briefest version of events. Then she sat at her kitchen table and looked at the wall for 60 seconds and made herself breathe slowly because she needed her thinking to be clean right now more than she needed to react. This was escalation. It was also desperation. The footage existed. The legal objection had been filed. Derek had provided his phone to Owen's legal contact the previous afternoon, and they were in the process of verifying it. Somebody knew the momentum was shifting and had decided to send a message through the only people who were too unprotected to have a lawyer between them and whatever came next. A 63-year-old man's livelihood, a 17-year-old girl. She called Felix at the fruit stand, whose number she had because she always had the numbers of people who showed up every week at a public park without any formal protection structure. He answered on the third ring, voice cautious. Felix, have you been to the park this morning? Not yet. Is something... There was an incident last night near the east entrance. Stay away from the park today. I'll explain everything, but stay away today. Mara, what? Please, I'll call you this afternoon. Just not today. She hung up and checked the time, 7:14. She called Nadine directly this time, not a text. I saw your message, Nadine said immediately. They hit the family's stand. Vandalism, threatening language on the sidewalk, timed after what's been in the news. I know, Owen just... Is this enough to escalate beyond the nursing association? Mara said. Because this isn't about me anymore. They are targeting civilians because they can't get to me through legitimate channels. A pause on the line. Nadine was thinking. Mara had learned that Nadine's pauses were not hesitation. They were the sound of a precise person choosing their words with intention. I've been in contact with an attorney who handles civil rights cases involving public space access, Nadine said. He's been watching the Wills situation because there are 2 prior incidents involving different communities. If the vandalism is photographed and documented, and the threatening language links to the prior text you received, you were warned, Mara said. The text to me said last warning. The writing at the stand said you were warned. Same language. Another pause. This one different. Send me the screenshot of the text, Nadine said. Now. Sending. She forwarded it as she was speaking. She heard Nadine receive it. Okay, Nadine said. This is no longer just a labor matter. I'm making a call this morning. Don't do anything visible until you hear from me. Mara spent the rest of the morning not doing anything visible. She reported to the administrative desk. She entered data. She ate her lunch at the window. The Channel 4 story had generated follow-up coverage. A brief article in the Delford Courier mentioning the ongoing situation at Calloway Park without much specifics, and a longer piece on a local community blog that had actually talked to Dorothy and to Owen and had managed to get the basic shape of the thing right. The community blog piece had 400 comments. About 2/3 of them were angry, but not at Mara. Something was shifting in how the story was being told. Slowly. Unevenly. But shifting. She was back at her desk at 1:30 when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize, which she now approached with the systematic distrust she'd developed over the past week. The message was from Derek. He had changed his number. My parents found out. Everything. They sat me down and I told them the whole thing. My dad wants to go to the police. Mom's a mess. Then I give them your contact info? She stared at the message. Yes, she typed back. And Derek, tell your dad that there's already a lawyer involved. Have him call Owen Park before he goes to the police, so the footage is handled correctly. He's going tonight. She texted Owen immediately. Derek's father is going to the police tonight with the footage. Prepare him. Owen. Already on it. Derek called 20 minutes ago. This is good, Mara. She wanted to agree. She wanted to feel the shape of things improving and let herself settle into it. But she had spent enough time in situations where momentum felt like resolution that she knew the feeling and the fact were not the same thing. She was right to keep waiting. What? At 3:47 p.m., Sandra Fitch from Patient Relations appeared at the door of the administrative office and asked Mara if she could come with her. They walked to the same third-floor conference room, the same copy paper smell. But the configuration was different this time. Sandra Fitch, Dr. Emmett, the HR representative, and a man in a dark suit she hadn't seen before who introduced himself as Martin Holt. The name landed in her chest like something physical. Holt, Wills, and Prescott, the same attorney who had signed the original complaint. I appreciate you taking the time, he said, which was the sentence that people used when they had already decided the meeting's outcome. Nadine had told her clearly, if they bring you into a meeting with an adverse attorney, you have the right to have counsel present. She had Nadine's number open in her phone before she sat down. I need to let you know, Mara said, that I'm going to call my attorney before this meeting proceeds. Fitch and Emmett looked at each other. Holt kept his face pleasant and professional. This is just a conversation, he said. Then it can wait 5 minutes while I make a call. She looked at Emmett. Unless the hospital's position is that I'm required to sit in a room with opposing counsel without representation? Emmett's face did something complicated. Of course not, he said. She stepped outside and called Nadine, who picked up on the first ring. They've got Holt in the room, Mara said. Don't say a word without me. Nadine's voice was sharp. I can be there in 40 minutes. Tell them I'm en route and the meeting doesn't start until I arrive. Mara went back in. My attorney is on her way. 40 minutes. Holt leaned back in his chair. That's really not necessary. My client simply wants to find a resolution that works for 40 minutes, Mara said. She sat down. She did not feel the silence. Neither did anyone else. 43 minutes later, Nadine Vance walked through the door with her legal pad and her recorder and the particular energy of someone who had driven across the city very fast and was now completely contained about it. She took the seat beside Mara, put the recorder on the table without asking, and looked at Holt. You can start now, she said. What Holt said, in the careful language of a man who had been handed a set of points to deliver, was this. His client, Conrad Wills, was prepared to consider the matter closed. He was prepared to request that the hospital review be concluded favorably. He was prepared to make a financial contribution to the Community Health Clinic's program. He was prepared to publicly clarify his comments on Channel 4 in a way that could be construed as supportive of the volunteer program. In exchange, he wanted Mara to sign a document agreeing not to pursue any civil action against Garrett Wills related to the incidents at Calloway Park, and to make no public statements about the Wills family in relation to these events. The room was quiet when he finished. Mara looked at Nadine. Nadine looked at Holt. Does your client know, Nadine said, with the conversational tone of someone describing the weather, that we have the original unedited footage from Calloway Park? That we have a witness who is present and is prepared to provide testimony? That we have documentation of 2 prior harassment complaints against Garrett Wills? That we have linked the vandalism of a community vendor's stand last night to a threatening text message received by my client? And that this morning I forwarded all of this to a civil rights attorney who has been watching your client's family for 2 years? Holt's expression did not change. He had been doing this long enough to keep his face still. My client simply wants to resolve this in a way that serves the community, he said. Then he should have his son stop harassing people in public parks, Nadine said. Mara said nothing. She had decided, sometime in the past few minutes, that she was going to let Nadine do this part, because Nadine was better at it, and because her own value right now was in being still, in being, as Kira would say, the person who hadn't needed to use it yet. We'll need to review any proposal in writing before responding, Nadine said. My client won't be signing anything today. Holt closed his folder. He stood, thanked everyone for their time in the way that meant nothing, and left. Emmett looked like a man who had hoped the meeting would end differently and wasn't sure what to do with his hands. I want to be clear, Nadine said to Emmett and Fitch before they could speak, that this hospital's decision to reassign my client correlated to a news segment timed to a complaint filed by the attorney who just sat across from us. is part of an ongoing documented pattern that we will be including in our formal response. I'd suggest you have your own legal counsel review the reassignment decision." They walked out together. In the hallway, Nadine exhaled through her nose, a short, controlled sound. "They're trying to get ahead of the footage," she said quietly. "I know. Which means they know it's coming." Nadine turned to look at her. "Derek's father is going to the police tonight?" "That's what he said." "If they file before the end of business tomorrow, the footage becomes part of a criminal investigation. At that point, Holt can't touch it, and Wills can't make it disappear." She paused. "If the footage doesn't reach the police before Wills moves, and he will move, this gets significantly harder." Mara understood what she was saying. The window was closing. Everything they'd built in the past week was scaffolding around one central piece, and if someone found a way to compromise that piece before it was formally protected by a police file number, the scaffolding came apart. She texted Derek again. "Is your father going tonight? What time?" No reply. She texted Owen. "Has Derek confirmed his father is going tonight?" Owen. "He called me at 2, said they'd go at 7. I haven't heard since. It was now 5:18. She stood in the hallway for a moment and tried to reach something solid in the middle of all the moving parts. And what she came back to was the same thing she always came back to when the situation had too many variables. The one thing she could control was herself, and specifically how clearly she was thinking. She texted Derek one more time. "Please confirm you're going tonight. It matters tonight specifically." She watched the message sit there marked as delivered and unread. At 5:40, she was walking to her car when her phone rang. Not Derek. Not Owen. A Delford area code she didn't recognize. She answered. "Mara Voss?" A woman's voice, clear and direct. "My name is Lieutenant Carla Soto. I'm with the Delford Police Department. I'd like to speak with you about an incident at Calloway Park." Mara slowed her walk. "Okay," she said carefully. "I want to be up front. I'm not calling about the complaint against you. I'm calling because I've been looking at a different set of incidents in this area over the past 14 months, and your name has come up in connection with a pattern we've been tracking. I'd like to meet tomorrow morning if you're available." "What kind of pattern?" Mara said. "Public space harassment. Targeted intimidation. 3 separate communities, 4 incidents before yours, none of which had enough individual weight to move forward." A pause. "Yours might." Mara stood still in the middle of the parking garage. "I'll be there," she said. 8 a.m., Delford Precinct on Harrow Street. She hung up. She stood in the garage for a moment longer, the same dripping pipe overhead she'd heard the night Derek had called, the same humming fluorescence. She called Owen. He picked up on the second ring. "The police called me," she said. "Lieutenant, they've been tracking a pattern." Mara... His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. "Derek's father just called me. They went to the station an hour ago. The desk sergeant who took their statement, she made a copy of the footage and told them a lieutenant had already flagged the case." Everything went quiet in the way things sometimes did, right before they changed. "Same lieutenant?" she said. "Soto," Owen said. She exhaled. Just once. Short and controlled, the way Kira had taught her years ago. The way you breathed when you knew the next thing was coming and you needed to be ready for it. "Okay," she said. "There's something else," Owen said, and his voice did the thing it did when he was managing something he didn't fully know how to say. "I got a call from Channel 4 2 hours ago, a reporter. They've been following the story, and they received something anonymously this afternoon. An email with documents." "What documents?" "Financial records, Parks Department meeting minutes, a chain of emails between Conrad Wills and the Delford Park Commissioner going back 18 months. Owen paused. "Mara, someone sent them a paper trail, someone with access to those records." She thought about that for a moment. "Someone on the inside," she said. "Someone who's been watching this for longer than we have," Owen said. "The reporter wants to speak with you, tonight, if possible." She looked at her phone. 5:53. She had a police meeting at 8 a.m. She had a reporter who'd received documents she hadn't sent. She had a lieutenant who had been tracking Conrad Wills's family for 14 months. And somewhere in the city, Garrett Wills still had his father's lawyer and his father's money and his father's relationship with the park commissioner. But the foundation that had made all of that feel permanent was developing cracks in places nobody had looked at until now. She started walking toward her car. She was 3 steps away when she heard the sound. It was fast, faster than she processed it consciously. The scrape of shoes on concrete from behind a support column to her left, and she was already turning when the figure stepped out. 2 of them, actually. Not Garrett, not his group from the park. These were older, harder-looking men she had never seen before, and the one in front held up his hands immediately in a gesture that might have meant we're not here for trouble, but that every trained part of her body was reading differently. "We just want to talk," he said. "Then talk from there," she said. She had 2 support columns between her and the exit. She had a phone in her hand. She had 6 years of deliberately not using a specific set of skills, and the next 3 seconds would determine whether that streak continued. The man took 1 step closer. "Mr. Wills thinks this has gone far enough," he said. "He thinks you're a smart woman. Smart women know when a situation has gotten bigger than it needs to be. Tell Mr. Wills," she said very quietly, "that the police have the footage." The man's jaw moved slightly. "He also thinks," he said, ignoring what she'd just said, "that whatever's been said tonight with whoever you've been talking to, that stays private. And in exchange for that, this ends. You go back to your regular job. The clinic gets reinstated. Everybody moves on." "Or," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I think you already know that part." She was absolutely still. Her weight was on the balls of her feet. Her hands were at her sides. The fluorescent light directly above the man flickered twice and steadied. He was reading her as someone who would hesitate, who would calculate the odds and decide against them. He was reading her as the quiet nurse who had ended up in the wrong situation through no particular strength of her own. He had never been more wrong about anyone in his life, and she was 3 seconds away from proving it when the sound of a car engine cut through the garage, headlights swinging through the entrance as a hospital security vehicle made its slow patrol pass, the guard inside visible through the windshield, radio on, unhurried. The man in front of her glanced at the security car, just once, just for a second. That second was all it would have taken. Instead, pressed record. "Say it again," she said, "for the record." The man looked at the phone, at her, at the security car slowing near the entrance. He took 1 step back. The one behind him was already moving, and then they were walking, not running, but moving with the purposeful, controlled pace of people who had been told not to make scenes, toward the stairwell exit on the far side of the garage. She stood there with her phone raised and recording until she couldn't hear their footsteps anymore. Her pulse was elevated. That was honest. Her hands were steady. That was also honest. She looked at the security guard in the patrol car. He hadn't seen any of it. He was already pulling back toward the main entrance, radio crackling. She lowered her phone and stopped the recording. 54 seconds of audio. 2 men's voices. A parking garage. A message from Conrad Wills delivered by people who weren't supposed to exist in polite public life. She forwarded it to Nadine before she reached her car. Then she sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands on the wheel, the engine not yet started. She was done being patient with the legitimate channels alone. She had been patient. She had documented and filed and waited and complied and stayed unremarkable. She had done all the things that people who were in the right were supposed to do. And tonight, a man had stepped out from behind a parking garage column and delivered a threat on behalf of someone who had spent 2 weeks systematically dismantling her professional life because she had told his son to leave a public park. She started the car. She was meeting a reporter tonight and a police lieutenant tomorrow morning, and she had 54 seconds of audio that was going to make both of those conversations very different from what anyone was expecting. The reporter's name was Gina Farouk, according to the text Owen had sent. She wrote for Channel 4's investigative unit. She had the financial documents and the email chain between Conrad Wills and the park commissioner, and she had been sitting on it for 2 hours waiting for Mara to call. Mara pressed the contact Owen had forwarded and put the phone to her ear as she pulled out of the garage. Farouk picked up on the second ring. "Ms. Voss," she said, "I've been hoping you'd call." "I have something for you," Mara said. "More than you were expecting. Can you meet tonight?" A brief silence. "Tell me where," Farouk said. "Tell me where," Farouk said. They met at a diner on Keswick Avenue that stayed open until midnight and had booths in the back with high wooden dividers and a counter staff that minded its own business. Mara arrived first, took the last booth, ordered coffee she didn't need, and sat with her back to the wall facing the entrance, an old habit she'd never fully broken. Gina Farouk was 38, small and precise, with dark eyes that moved quickly over everything when she walked in. She spotted Mara without hesitation, slid into the booth, put a small recorder on the table and a closed laptop beside it, and said, "I want to be clear about something before we start." "Okay," Mara said. "I'm not doing a piece about a nurse who got bullied. That's not interesting enough, and it's not accurate to what I think this actually is." She opened the laptop. "What I have suggests a coordinated effort by Conrad Wills to control public space access in Delford for commercial purposes. The park commissioner, the city permitting office, and 2 city council members are in these emails. This goes back 18 months. Your situation is the part that made it visible." Mara looked at the screen. The emails were dense, formal language, careful phrasing, the kind of thing people wrote when they thought they were being discreet but still needed a record internally. Conrad Wills's name appeared in the header of a dozen of them. The park commissioner's name was Aldous Greer, and he appeared to have been a very active correspondent. "What was the commercial purpose?" Mara said. "There's a development proposal, mixed use, high-end retail, and residential, that Will's Property Group has been positioning for 2 years. It centers on a block adjacent to Calloway Park. The park itself is zoned public open space, which makes development directly in it impossible. But if you could demonstrate that the park had become a zone of public disorder, of unregulated activity, of incidents," Farouk paused. "You build a case for rezoning the adjacent block and a redesign of the park's eastern boundary, which would free up the land Wills needs." Mara sat with that for a moment. "He's been running vendors and community programs out of the park to manufacture disorder. Selectively, quietly, over time. Nothing dramatic enough to attract a single news cycle, but enough to build a paper record." Farouk tapped the screen. "Your clinic was on his list, the Herb family, a youth soccer program that quietly lost its park permit 6 months ago and relocated without making noise. A seniors walking group that stopped using the park after 2 of their members were harassed." The scope of it settled over Mara like something cold. She thought about Constance Briggs, who had told her Garrett had run off the Herb family before. She thought about the desk sergeant, the police report that went nowhere. She thought about the 14 months Lieutenant Soto had mentioned on the phone, 14 months of watching, accumulating, unable to move because nothing reached the threshold. "Someone inside his operation sent you these documents," Mara said. "I don't reveal sources," Farouk said immediately. Then after a beat, "But yes." Someone with direct access decided they were done. Mara pulled out her phone. "I have something for you too." She played the 54 seconds of audio from the garage, the voice of the man with his hands up. "Mr. Wills thinks this has gone far enough." Farouk listened with completely still eyes, then listened again. "When was this?" she said. 2 hours ago. Delford Central Hospital parking garage. 2 men I've never seen before. I was alone." "You recorded it." "I raised my phone and said, 'Say it again for the record.' He stopped talking and they left." Farouk looked at her for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite admiration. It was more like the face of someone who had just found a piece that explained the shape of a puzzle they'd been staring at. "I need you to send me that audio," Farouk said, "and I need you to understand what publishing this means. Once this is out, all of it, the documents, the audio, the footage Derek provided, Wills is going to know who held what. He has lawyers. He has resources." "He's already used both," Mara said. "He had his lawyers send a complaint to my employer within 72 hours of the park incident. I've been pulled from patient care. My volunteer program has been suspended. He had people on television with his face performing concern about public safety." She picked up her coffee. "What he hasn't had yet is someone publishing the actual record." Farouk closed her laptop. "My editor wants to run this weekend." "What do you need from me?" "On record, your account of the park incident, the garage tonight, and anything you can tell me about the prior incidents involving other park users that you personally witnessed or were told about by people willing to be named." "Dorothy Hale will speak on record. Owen Park will speak on record. Sophia's family, I'd need to ask. Felix is a maybe." She paused. "Lieutenant Soto called me tonight. She wants to meet tomorrow morning." Farouk's eyebrows moved. "Soto called you directly?" 8 a.m. "Then the department is moving." Farouk said it quietly, like something she was absorbing. "If Soto is meeting with you the same week Derek's father filed with the footage, she's not fact-finding anymore. She already has something." They talked for another hour and 40 minutes. Mara gave her account clearly, without editorializing, without making herself the center of every scene, because she'd understood somewhere in the past week that the story that needed telling wasn't about her, specifically. It was about what happened when a person with money decided that public space was his to curate, and what it took for anyone to stop him. She walked out of the diner at 11:18 and drove home through empty streets and slept for 5 hours without dreaming. Lieutenant Carla Soto was not what Mara had pictured. She was 50, maybe, with short natural hair going silver at the temples and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She had the desktop of someone who processed a large amount of information and had chosen organized chaos over any pretense of tidiness. She shook Mara's hand with the grip of someone who'd done it 10,000 times and had stopped thinking about it. Coffee? She said. Please, Mara said. They sat across from each other in Soto's office, not a formal interview room, which told Mara something. The door was closed, but not locked. I'm going to tell you what we have, Soto said, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to know up front that you are not under any investigative scrutiny. What you are is a witness with direct knowledge of a pattern we've been building a case around. 14 months, Mara said. Soto looked at her. You did math on the phone. You said you'd been tracking it for 14 months. The Wills property development proposal is about 2 years old according to the documents Gina Farouk showed me last night. Soto's expression didn't change significantly, but something behind it did. You met with Farouk. She called Owen Park. He called me. We met last night. Mara set her phone on the desk. She showed me financial records and internal emails. I gave her the garage audio. Soto leaned forward slightly. What garage audio? Mara played it. All 54 seconds. Soto listened twice without speaking, then picked up a pen. What time? 5:53 p.m. Delford Central Parking Garage, Level 2. You can identify either man? No, neither gave a name. One spoke, the other didn't say anything. Physical description. Mara gave it. Height, build, approximate age, what they were wearing, the direction they exited. She had looked at them long enough and with enough specific attention that she could place them. Kira had drilled observation as a discipline years ago, and it had not left her. Soto wrote everything down with the systematic economy of someone who had been doing this long enough to write fast and read it back without missing anything. The footage Derek Pallone provided, Soto said. You know about that. His father brought it in, yes. We've authenticated it. Our digital forensics unit confirmed the metadata. The original file was created at the park on Saturday, and the edited clip that went public was derived from it with 4 segments removed. She looked up. The removed segments show Garrett Wills directing his group toward the tent, dropping paperwork on the ground, and making physical contact with an elderly volunteer by putting his hand on her arm to move her. Mara had not known about Dorothy's arm. Dorothy had not mentioned that. Something moved through her. Not the familiar cold precision, but something rawer. She pushed it down. Dorothy Hale is 73, she said. I know, she's given a statement. Soto kept her eyes on Mara steadily. She didn't want to tell you because she was worried you'd... Her words were, do something that gets her in trouble. Dorothy said that? Pretty much verbatim. A pause that was the closest thing to warmth Mara had seen from Soto. She thinks highly of you, for the record. She also thinks you have a shorter fuse than you let on. I don't. I know. I looked into you. She said it without apology. 14-0 professional record in mixed martial arts. 0 conduct violations in competition. 1 complaint from a promoter, withdrawn. 6 years at Delford Central with a clean professional record and 2 commendations. She set down the pen. You had every physical capability to hurt Garrett Wills in that park, and you didn't. You told him security was coming and pointed at cameras and waited. That tells me more about your judgment than anything else in this file. Mara didn't say anything. What I'm about to tell you is not public yet, Soto said. But I'm telling you because I think you've earned it, and because it affects decisions you're going to make in the next 24 hours. She folded her hands on the desk. Garrett Wills was arrested this morning. The words landed in the room and sat there. What charge? Mara said. Vandalism, criminal threatening, and conspiracy to commit harassment. The vandalism at the park vendor's stand. We pulled a partial boot print from the sidewalk near the written threat, and we have cell tower data placing Garrett's phone in the immediate area at 11:40 p.m. the night of the incident. She paused. His two friends who were with him in the park on Saturday have also been brought in for questioning. One of them, the one who originally filmed the interaction, provided a statement last night that corroborates the full sequence shown in Derek's footage. Two of them gave statements, Mara said. One of them is Derek. The other is a young man named Russell Carey, who apparently called a lawyer Tuesday and has been deciding what to do since then. He came in voluntarily this morning. Soto picked up her pen again, turned it in her fingers. Garrett's attorney has been contacted. Conrad Wills's attorney, a slight pause on the name, is currently unavailable, according to his office. He'll be available, Mara said. Yes, he will. Soto looked at her. I want to be honest with you about something. The criminal charges against Garrett are real and they're supportable. The larger case, the commercial coordination, the permitting manipulation, the relationship between Conrad Wills and Aldous Greer at the Parks Commission, that's a different investigation. Longer, harder, less certain. But it's an investigation. As of this week, yes. She set down the pen for the last time. The documents Farouk received. We received a parallel set. Same source. Mara absorbed that. Someone sent them to both. Someone wanted to make sure it wasn't suppressible. Soto looked at her steadily. Whoever that person is, I can't tell you, and I wouldn't if I could. But I will tell you that they took a serious personal risk, and they did it because they'd been watching this situation for a long time and decided the moment had come. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes. Soto asked Mara to formalize her statement about the garage confrontation in writing, which Mara did in a room next door with a detective named Marlowe, who typed quickly and read it back correctly. She signed it. She shook Soto's hand on the way out. She stood on the sidewalk outside the precinct on Harrow Street in the morning light and called Nadine. Garrett's been arrested, Mara said. A silence. When? Nadine said. This morning. This morning, vandalism, criminal threatening, conspiracy to harass. Okay. Nadine's voice was doing the thing it did when she was thinking and talking simultaneously. Okay, that changes the hospital's calculus significantly. If Garrett is formally charged, the complaint he filed, which was the basis for your reassignment, becomes an adverse legal action by someone under criminal investigation. That's a very uncomfortable position for the hospital to be defending. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. Give me an hour. She paused. Mara, this is moving. I know, she said. Make sure it moves in the right direction. Otam. The Channel 4 story ran Saturday morning. Gina Farouk's piece was 11 minutes long in its broadcast version and considerably longer online, where the full documents were published with names redacted in places and visible in others. It led with Calloway Park, and it widened steadily. The clinic, the Herb family, the youth soccer program, the seniors group, the permitting paper trail, the emails between Conrad Wills and Aldous Greer. It included Mara's account on camera, brief and clear, given in a conference room at the Nursing Association's office with Nadine present. It included Dorothy speaking from her own kitchen, which was the right choice because Dorothy's kitchen had plants on the windowsill, and it was impossible to watch her speak and think she was anything other than exactly what she was. It did not include the garage audio. Soto had asked Farouk to hold it as part of the active investigation, and Farouk had agreed in exchange for first access when it could be released. That was a professional transaction, clean on both sides. What the piece did include, what made Mara's phone start ringing at 7:40 a.m. on Saturday and not stop for the rest of the morning, was Derek Pallone's face. He had asked to be on camera. His parents had sat with him while he decided and had not tried to stop him, which Mara thought said something about them worth knowing. He was 23 and he looked his age, and he said plainly that he had been there, that he had filmed it, that Garrett had taken his phone and edited the clip, and that he had gone to the police because what he had watched done to the Herb family's stand was not something he could continue not talking about. He wasn't polished. He said, twice and looked at the wrong camera once. It was exactly right. Aldous Greer, the parks commissioner, issued a statement through his office at 9 a.m. saying he was taking a voluntary leave of absence pending a review of his conduct. The statement was 4 sentences. It did not say he had done nothing wrong. It did not say he was cooperating. It said he was taking a leave of absence, which in the language of public officials meant something specific, and it was not innocence. By 10, Delford Community Watch, the same page where the edited clip had been posted, had a new post from its administrator that said the original post had been removed and that the page was not a platform for harassment. Someone had gotten to the administrator. Mara did not know who and did not spend time wondering. Her phone kept ringing. Most of the numbers she didn't recognize. She let most of them go to voicemail, checked the voicemails in batches, and replied to the ones that mattered. Owen, who was fielding calls about reinstating the clinic program. Nadine, who had called the hospital that morning. Kira, who had watched the segment at her gym before opening and left a voicemail that said only, "I'm proud of you. Don't let it go to your head." The call she had not expected came at 11:22 from a 202 area code that she almost didn't answer. She answered, "Ms. Voss," a man's voice, measured and professional. "My name is Warren Tabb. I'm a deputy director with the Office of Inspector General for the state of Delford. We've been monitoring the situation involving Calloway Park in relation to an ongoing review of municipal contracting and permitting practices. I'd like to speak with you this week if you're available." She stood in her kitchen where she had been standing for most of the morning, back against the counter, window light coming in sideways. "What does the Inspector General's office want to speak with me about?" she said carefully. "We believe you may have direct knowledge relevant to a pattern of public space access interference that extends beyond the incidents already reported. We've been conducting a broader review for several months, and the events of this week have accelerated some of our timelines." "How many jurisdictions?" she said. A brief pause. 3 cities, including Delford. 1 proposed development project with multiple subsidiary interests and several affiliated properties. He paused again. "This is considerably larger than the park, Ms. Voss, and you're currently the most visible person in the public record connected to it." She thought about Soto saying longer, harder, less certain. She thought about the anonymous source who had sent the same documents to a journalist and a police department simultaneously to prevent suppression. She thought about how a man with enough money could run smaller people out of public space for 18 months, and nobody could get enough traction to stop it until one specific nurse in one specific park on one specific Saturday afternoon didn't move when she was supposed to. "I'll speak with you," she said. "I'll have my attorney on the call." "Of course," Tabb said. "We'll be in touch by Monday." She hung up and called Nadine immediately. "The State Inspector General just called me," she said. The silence on Nadine's end lasted almost 4 seconds, which was the longest she had ever heard Nadine go without speaking. 3 cities, Mara said. Multiple properties. "Mara," Nadine's voice was careful. "You understand what that means. It means the park was a small piece of something considerably bigger. It means Conrad Wills has been doing this in at least 2 other places, and someone at the state level has been building a case. And now you're attached to it publicly in a way that makes you useful to them." "Useful how?" "As a witness with a documented record of the conduct, a public profile and credibility established by the reporting. You're the face of something the IG's office has been trying to put a face on." She paused. "This is good. I want to be clear. But it also means you're in this for a longer stretch than a hospital review." "I know," Mara said. She did know. She had known since the garage, maybe earlier, that the thing she had walked into was not the size she'd initially seen it. It had kept revealing itself in layers: clinic complaint, viral video, hospital reassignment, vandalized herb stand, police footage, Channel 4 documents, State Inspector General. Each layer underneath bigger and more serious than the one above. She had not asked for any of it. She had asked a man to leave a public park. She had protected people who couldn't protect themselves on a Saturday afternoon in the city where she worked and lived. And somehow that had been enough to pull a thread loose in something that a lot of powerful people had spent a long time carefully weaving. Delford Central Medical called Nadine on Monday morning. Dr. Emmett's call came at 8:52. He did not call Mara directly. He called Nadine, which meant the hospital had already run this decision past their own legal counsel, which meant they had been advised that calling Mara directly at this point without going through her attorney was inadvisable. Nadine called Mara at 9:03. "Reinstatement, effective immediately, full patient care duties. Written apology from the office of the hospital director, which we will be negotiating the language of today." A pause. "They're also withdrawing from the complaint process entirely and issuing a statement that the complaint was unsubstantiated. Mara was in her kitchen again, same window light, different Monday. The volunteer program, she said, reinstated. Owen gets a formal letter by end of week. Another pause. They want a quiet resolution. No press release from our side, no public statement about the reassignment. And you're recommending? I'm recommending we accept the reinstatement immediately and let the apology language be our only negotiation point with them. The larger issues are being handled by the police and the IG's office. The hospital is a secondary actor that got used and is now trying to quietly exit, making them into a public villain when they're already reversing course costs us goodwill and time we need elsewhere. Agreed, Mara said. You're back to work Wednesday. She exhaled. Okay. Mara. Nadine's voice did something it didn't usually do, something that was adjacent to warmth without fully being it. You handled this well, from the beginning. Most people, they either collapse or they overcorrect and hand the other side a weapon. You did neither. I had good people around me, Mara said. You did, Nadine said, but you're the one who stayed still long enough for it to matter. After she hung up, she stood at the window for a while. The city below was doing its regular, indifferent thing. Traffic, a delivery truck double parked, 2 pigeons on the fire escape of the building across the street, engaged in whatever territorial dispute pigeons were always having. She thought about Sophia. She texted Owen to ask if the family was planning to return to the park. He replied within minutes. They went back Saturday, set up the stand. About 30 people came over to buy from them in the first hour. Dorothy organized it. She didn't tell me until after. Mara put her phone down and made herself lunch for the first time in a week without standing over the counter eating it. She sat at the table. She ate. She thought about Wednesday. Garrett Wills was formally charged on Tuesday afternoon. The charges from the weekend plus additional counts of criminal harassment filed on behalf of Sophia's family. His bail was set at a level that his father's money could cover, which it did. But the conditions of his release included a prohibition from Calloway Park and the surrounding 4-block area, which was a small specific justice that Mara found meaningful in the way that small specific justices sometimes were. Conrad Wills had not appeared publicly since his Channel 4 appearance. His attorney, Martin Holt of Holt, Wills and Prescott, had issued a statement saying his client denied any wrongdoing and was cooperating with authorities. The word cooperating in that context meant something that was not cooperation. Aldous Greer resigned as Parks Commissioner on Tuesday evening. He resigned rather than accept the leave of absence, which the city's statement described as a mutual decision, which it was not. The city council member, whose name appeared in 3 of Farouk's documents, requested a closed session review of his own conduct by the City Ethics Board, which was the political equivalent of asking the teacher to grade your own test, but was at least an acknowledgement that there was a test to grade. None of it was clean. None of it was fast. The IG investigation would take months, possibly years. Some of what Conrad Wills had built would survive regardless. The money, the properties, the fundamental insulation that came from being the kind of person who could afford to be wrong for a long time without it costing him everything. But Calloway Park was still Calloway Park. And on Tuesday evening, Mara walked the 6 blocks from the hospital to the park after her last day of administrative reassignment, and she sat on the bench by the fountain where she'd sat the night she'd almost called Kira but hadn't, and she watched the city camera on the light post and the permit board near the tents, and the pigeons doing their territorial thing around the fountain edge. Felix came past with 2 fruit cups, extra lime on both, without being asked. "You're coming back Saturday?" he said. "Saturday," she said. He nodded and kept walking, which was exactly the right amount of ceremony for the moment. She sat for a while longer. The evening was going from gold to blue, the way it did in summer when the light was slow about giving up. A father was pushing a kid on the swings near the playground. Someone's dog was losing a dispute with a pigeon near the path. She was 2 blocks into her walk home when her phone rang. Unknown number, 202 area code. Not Tab this time. A different voice. Younger, more clipped, with the specific kind of authority that came from a title people had heard of. "Ms. Voss, I'm calling from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Delford. We'd like to meet with you this week regarding the Wills matter." A pause. "We've been monitoring the state-level developments, and there are elements of the pattern that may constitute federal violations. Specifically, interference with federally protected public access rights, and potential wire fraud in the use of the municipal permitting system across state lines. Mara stopped walking. Across state lines. Ms. Voss? I'm here, she said. I'll need to have my attorney on any meeting. Of course. We'll coordinate through her. She hung up and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the blue-gold evening light, the city moving around her, and she called Nadine. The U.S. attorney just called me, she said. Another 4-second silence from Nadine. Federal, Nadine said. Wire fraud across state lines. Federal interference with public access rights. Mara started walking again. Nadine, how many cities did Tab say? 3. If there are 3 cities and it crosses state lines, then what Conrad Wills has been doing isn't just a local development scheme, Nadine said quietly. It's a pattern of federal violations that someone has been building a case around for a long time, and they've been waiting for the right moment to move. Mara thought about the anonymous source, the simultaneous document drops, the IG call on Saturday, the federal call on Tuesday, all of it timed, coordinated in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Someone has been waiting for this to go public, Mara said. They needed the visibility. They needed someone to make enough noise that the case didn't disappear into a desk drawer. And you made enough noise, Nadine said. I told a man to leave a public park, Mara said. And that, Nadine said with the closest thing to a dry smile that her voice allowed, is how some of these things start. Mara kept walking. The hospital was behind her. The park was 6 blocks in the other direction. Her apartment was straight ahead. She thought about Wednesday, about the smell of the emergency department on a Tuesday evening when someone needed her and she was there to answer. About 14 people in a line at 2 white tents on a Saturday afternoon, waiting to have their blood pressure checked by someone who showed up. She thought about Sophia's face in the park that evening, worn, 17, already learning that the people who were supposed to help sometimes didn't. She thought about Conrad Wills in his office watching numbers climb on a social media post, certain he understood what kind of person he was dealing with. She was almost home when her phone lit up with a forwarded email from Nadine, a preliminary notice from the U.S. Attorney's Office requesting her cooperation as a material witness. The subject line read, United States vs. Wills et al. Multiple defendants. A federal case. A pattern that had been building for years in 3 different cities, waiting for someone to step into a circle of 5 men in a park and not move. She held the phone and looked at the email. Then she put her key in her door, went upstairs, and made tea, because tomorrow was a work day and she needed to sleep. But the email stayed open on her phone on the nightstand, glowing faintly in the dark, and somewhere in the city, in an office she had never seen, lawyers were building the walls of a case around a name that had spent years believing it was untouchable. The walls were not finished yet. There was still one piece that nobody had placed, one question that Mara kept turning over as she lay in the dark, the one thing that didn't fit cleanly into any of the structures that had been built this week. The anonymous source. 3 cities. Federal violations. A paper trail sent simultaneously to a journalist and a police department, timed to the exact moment public visibility made it unsuppressible. Someone with inside access to Conrad Wills's operation had decided to end it. Not a stranger. Not a bureaucrat. Someone close enough to have the emails, the financial records, the meeting minutes. Someone who had been watching this for longer than the IG, longer than Soto, longer than anyone who had come forward in the past 2 weeks. And they still hadn't identified themselves. Mara closed her eyes. On the nightstand, the phone glowed with one new unread message. It had arrived while she was thinking, from a number she didn't have saved. She almost left it until morning. She didn't. She opened it. 4 words, no signature, no follow-up. We should talk soon. We should talk soon. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling in the dark. 4 words from a number she didn't have saved. No name, no context. Just the quiet certainty of someone who knew she would understand what it meant without being told, which meant it was someone who had been watching closely enough to know that she'd reached the same conclusion they had. She picked the phone back up and looked at the number. Delford area code. She didn't recognize it, but that meant very little at this point. She had stopped trusting her own contact list as a reliable map of who was relevant to her life. She typed back, "Who is this?" She put the phone down again. She waited 4 minutes. Nothing. Then she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She let it go. Not because it wasn't important, but because she had learned, in the years since she'd stopped being a fighter professionally and started being a person who dealt with emergencies for a living, that some things didn't resolve faster because you pushed them. Some things resolved when you let the next morning come. She slept. Not perfectly. She woke twice, thought about the message, thought about the U.S. Attorney's email still open on her phone, made herself stop. But she slept enough. At 6:15, her alarm went off and she got up and made coffee and stood at the window with the early light coming in sideways and thought about what it meant to go back to work today. Wednesday. Patient care. The emergency department at Delford Central Medical, where people came in broken or frightened or both, and needed someone who could be steady when they weren't. She had missed it more than she had let herself admit during the past week and a half of sitting at an administrative desk, entering data into forms. Not the drama of it. She had never been someone who needed the drama, just the work itself, the specific, concrete, unglamorous necessity of it. Her phone showed one new message, received at 6:03 while she was still asleep. Same number as the night before. My name is Patricia Wills. I'm Conrad's sister-in-law. I'm the one who sent the documents. I'll explain everything if you're willing to meet. Mara read it standing at the window with her coffee going warm in her hand. Conrad Wills's sister-in-law. She thought about that for a long time. Inside the operation. Access to the emails, the financial records, the meeting minutes. Someone who had watched it build over months and years and had reached a point where continuing to watch was no longer something she was willing to do. She typed back, I'm meeting with my attorney in the U.S. Attorney's office this week. If you're willing to speak with both of them, I can facilitate that. But if you have information relevant to the federal investigation, they need to hear it directly. She sent it before she could second-guess the wording. Then she finished her coffee, put on her uniform, and went to work. The emergency department received her back in the way that institutions receive returning people, without ceremony, with the practical acknowledgement of someone who knew where things were and could be trusted to find them again. Bevins was at the station when Mara came on and said, Bay 2 has a chest pain workup that needs eyes. And that was the entirety of the welcome back conversation, which was exactly right. She worked. For 8 hours, she worked steadily through the particular inventory of a busy emergency department. The chest pain that turned out to be musculoskeletal and not cardiac, the 8-year-old with a wrist fracture who was braver than her parents, the elderly man with altered mental status, whose daughter was in the waiting room in the specific distress of someone who had been frightened for weeks, but was only now letting herself know it. Mara sat with the daughter for 10 minutes after the man was stabilized, not doing anything clinical, just being present. She had always thought that presence was underrated as a medical intervention. At her lunch break, she found 2 texts from Nadine, one confirming the meeting with the U.S. Attorney's office for Thursday at 10, and one that said simply, Patricia Wills called me this morning. I know. Then 2 minutes later, she's real. I verified. We should talk tonight. Mara replied, call me at 7. She ate her lunch at the same window she'd eaten at for the past 10 days, but it felt different today. She had her department badge instead of a visitor's administrative pass. The view was the same parking lot, but the angle had shifted in some way she couldn't articulate. She thought about Patricia Wills, about the specific moral architecture of someone who married into a family, watched what that family did with its power over years, and at some point crossed from discomfort to action. It wasn't a simple story. It was rarely a simple story. People who made decisions like that usually had reasons they'd been accumulating for a long time, and the final one was rarely the biggest. She finished her lunch and went back to work. Nadine called at 7:02. Patricia Wills is 54, Nadine said. She married Conrad's younger brother Elliot in 2009. Elliot died 4 years ago. Stroke. She stayed connected to the family for reasons she described to me as complicated. A pause. She worked for several years as the internal bookkeeper for Will's Property Group. She left the position 18 months ago. 18 months, Mara said, when the park campaign started. She says she left because of what she saw beginning to happen. She kept copies of documents she believed were evidence of wrongdoing because she wasn't sure what to do with them yet. Nadine paused. She's been sitting on them for a year and a half. When the Channel 4 story started gaining traction, when your name became the face of it, she decided the window was open. She needed it to be public first. She needed it to be unsuppressible. She's not naive. She knows what Conrad Wills can do when he decides to make something go away quietly. Another pause. She's frightened. She wanted me to tell you that she's not doing this for any reason other than she's watched what this family does and she can't continue to not do something about it. Mara thought about the timing again. The simultaneous document drops to Farouk and the police. The careful engineering of a moment where the information couldn't be buried because it was already in two places before anyone could stop it. She's smart, Mara said. Yes. Nadine's voice had the quality it got when she respected something. She's also scared in the way that people are scared when they've done something irreversible and are only now fully feeling the weight of it. Is she willing to speak with the U.S. Attorney's Office? She'll be at Thursday's meeting. I've confirmed it. Nadine paused. Mara, I need you to understand what her testimony does to the federal case. She has 18 months of internal financial records. She has emails between Conrad, Aldous Greer, and 2 municipal officials in 2 other cities. She was present at meetings that established the strategy. A beat. This isn't a circumstantial case anymore. This is documented. Mara stood in her kitchen and looked at the wall. She thought about a Saturday afternoon in a park. A tent with a permit board. 14 people in line. Felix with his fruit cups. Dorothy with her intake stack. She thought about standing at a table and not moving when a man in an expensive jacket came over and dropped her paperwork on the ground. She thought about how the smallest moment of not moving had pulled a thread loose in something she hadn't even known was there. Okay, she said. I'll be at Thursday's meeting. One more thing, Nadine said. The hospital's written apology. I've seen the draft. It's adequate, not effusive. It acknowledges the reassignment was made without evidentiary basis and states clearly that your professional record at Delford Central is without question. She paused. They'd like you to not speak publicly about the reassignment once you receive it. And your recommendation? Accept it. You don't need the fight with the hospital. The hospital did something wrong and they're owning enough of it. Save your energy for what matters. Which is the case. Which is the case, Nadine agreed. Thursday's meeting lasted 4 hours. The U.S. Attorney's Office was on the 12th floor of a building downtown that smelled like recycled air and carpet adhesive. The attorney handling the case was a woman named Dana Rice, 45, direct, with the specific patience of someone who had learned that the value of a witness was directly proportional to how clearly they understood what they were being asked. Patricia Wills arrived 8 minutes late, which felt like the courage it probably was. She was a small woman with gray-streaked hair and the posture of someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time and was only now setting it down. She did not look at Mara directly when she came in, and Mara did not push it, because sometimes people needed to do hard things in the order they could manage them. Mara gave her account first. Clear, sequential, specific. The same account she had given to Soto, to Farouk, to Nadine, each time slightly more refined because repetition had helped her identify what was essential and what was texture. She answered Rice's follow-up questions without elaborating beyond what was asked, because she had learned in the past 2 weeks that precision was more powerful than volume. Then Patricia spoke. She spoke for 2 hours. She described the development proposal and when she had first understood its scope. She described the strategy meetings where Conrad had laid out the park campaign, not in those words. Never in those words, always in the careful language of property development and community enhancement and asset optimization. She described the first vendor who had been run out and the second, and how each time Garrett had been deployed because Garrett was young enough and careless enough to not understand that you weren't supposed to be visible doing this. She described the relationship with Aldous Greer and how it had worked. The dinners, the donations, the specific favors that moved through the permitting system like water through a design channel. She described when she had started keeping copies of documents. She described Elliot, her husband, who had known some of what his brother did and had lived with it in the way that people lived with things they couldn't change and couldn't fully look at. She described him dying and being left alone in the orbit of a family she had never fully belonged to, with a job that gave her access to records that nobody thought she'd do anything with. She was not polished. She cried once, briefly, when she described the seniors' walking group. A detail Mara hadn't known, the specific cruelty of it, the particular meanness of targeting people in their 70s who had used a park path for years and quietly stopped because a group of young men told them they should. She wiped her eyes with a tissue she'd brought and kept going because she had decided to do this, and she was going to finish it. Mara watched her and thought about the many different shapes that courage came in, and how rarely any of them looked like what you expected. The indictment of Conrad Wills came down 6 weeks later. Mara heard about it from Nadine, who called at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning while Mara was charting between patients. Federal grand jury, Nadine said, wire fraud, conspiracy to interfere with public access rights, bribery of a municipal official, that's Greer, and 2 counts of obstruction. A pause. Aldous Greer was also indicted. The city council member is cooperating in exchange for a reduced charge. 2 officials from the other 2 cities are separately charged. Mara leaned against the wall in the hallway between bays. Garrett, she said. State charges stand. His trial date is set for next spring. The state DA's office is not offering a plea for anything involving the targeting of Sophia's family. They've been explicit about that. Nadine paused. The federal case will take time. Conrad Wills has resources and he'll use every one of them. But the evidence is documented. Patricia Wills's testimony is formal. The case is real. How's Patricia? Mara asked. She's staying with her daughter in another city. She's okay, I think. She sounds lighter than she did 2 months ago. A beat. She asked me to tell you something. What? She said she watched the Channel 4 segment twice before she sent the documents. She said she needed to know what kind of person you were before she decided whether you were worth the risk of sending them to the right place. Mara didn't say anything for a moment. What did she decide? She said. She decided you were the kind of person who doesn't move when someone tells them to move, Nadine said. She found that persuasive. After she hung up, Mara stood in the hallway for a moment. Bay 4 had a patient who needed her. The department was busy in the way it was always busy. Bevins walked past with a chart and gave her a look that said, "When you're done thinking, we have work." And Mara nodded and pushed off the wall. She went back to work. The formal apology from Delford Central Medical arrived on a Tuesday in the form of a printed letter on hospital letterhead, signed by the hospital director, delivered by Sandra Fitch with the manner of someone completing an obligation they were glad to be done with. Mara read it at the nurse's station and put it in her bag without commenting on it. Later, she would read it more carefully and find it careful but honest. It didn't perform contrition. It stated facts, which she thought was worth more. The language Nadine had negotiated said that the reassignment had been made in error, that Mara's professional record at Delford Central was exemplary, and that the hospital's community volunteer program partnership with the Calloway Park Clinic had been fully reinstated with the hospital's formal endorsement. The last sentence said, "We are grateful for Ms. Voss's continued service to this institution and the community it serves." She folded the letter once and put it in the back of her work locker behind her spare scrubs, where she kept a few other things she didn't look at every day but wanted to know were there. The clinic returned to Calloway Park on the first Saturday of the following month. It was a better day than it had any right to be, overcast but cool, which was easier for the older patients who lined up early. Dorothy had expanded the intake system while Mara was suspended, and it was better now, more organized, with a proper sign-in sheet and a folding partition for privacy. She walked Mara through the changes with the expression of someone who had used the interruption productively and did not intend to be modest about it. Felix brought fruit cups. Extra lime, both of them. He had started bringing one for Dorothy as well, which Dorothy accepted without making it a moment. The Herb family's stand was set up at the east entrance, larger than it had been before. They'd acquired a second folding table. Sophia was there, serving customers with the efficiency of someone who had decided that the best response to people trying to diminish her was to expand. She recognized Mara across the park and raised one hand. Not a wave exactly. More like an acknowledgement. One person recognizing another across a space they both had the right to be in. Mara raised her hand back. Constance Briggs came at 10:30, same time as always, sat in the same chair, asked about her medication with the same careful attention to detail that she always brought to it. At the end of the consultation, she held Mara's hand for a moment and said, "I'm glad they didn't make you leave." And Mara said, "Me too, Constance," and meant it in a way that was bigger than the sentence. The line ran until noon. Afterward, while Dorothy and the other volunteers were packing up, Mara walked to the bench by the fountain and sat for a while. The same bench, the same fountain, the city camera on the light post above her. The permit board by the tent, the sounds of the park in the middle of a Saturday. Kids near the playground, someone's music from across the path, a pigeon conducting its usual territorial grievances. She thought about where she had been sitting the night she'd almost called Kira, but hadn't. How close she had been then to calling and asking for something she couldn't name. How the first real thing she'd done had been to submit a public records request for footage of an incident, because the thing she trusted most when everything else was uncertain was a documented record of what actually happened. She was still that person. That was the thing that the past 2 months had clarified, more than anything else. She was still the person who brought extra blankets and stayed late and listened to what people were really asking underneath the question they'd said out loud. The other version of herself, the one who had walked into cages undefeated and walked out, hadn't replaced this one. It had never been a replacement. It had always been underneath, the foundation that let her stand still when the situation required stillness and move with precision when movement was what was needed. She had never been one thing. She had been told she was one thing. Quiet. Harmless. The kind nurse, the easy target. The people who had looked at her and seen only the surface had made an assumption that felt safe to them because it was convenient. They had mistaken her restraint for limitation, her stillness for passivity, her choices for incapacity. She had never corrected the assumption because she had never needed to, until she did. Kira arrived at 12:20. Mara had not asked her to come. But Kira had texted that morning, going to be in the neighborhood, park bench around noon? And Mara had replied, fountain, because Kira had been doing this for 25 years, showing up at the right time and not making a performance of it. She sat down beside Mara and looked at the fountain for a while without speaking. That was one of the things Mara had always valued about her, the willingness to just be present without needing to fill the space with something. How do you feel? Kira said finally. Mara thought about it honestly, the way you had to think about it when someone who knew you well asked you directly. Like something ended, she said, and something else isn't started yet. That space in between. Good space, Kira said. It's uncomfortable. Good spaces usually are. Kira turned to look at her. You know what I kept thinking about the whole time this was happening? What? That fight you had in Merriweather, second round. The woman had you against the ropes for 40 seconds, and you didn't panic. You just waited. Kira looked back at the fountain. Everybody watching thought you were losing. I knew you were counting. Mara remembered that fight. She remembered the particular quality of 40 seconds against the ropes. The sounds changing, the crowd, her own breathing, and underneath all of it the thing Kira had trained into her. The person who panics has already decided they're losing. You don't have to decide that. I won that round, Mara said. You did, Kira said. Same way. They sat for a while longer. Felix walked past and pointedly set a third fruit cup on the bench between them, saying nothing, and kept walking. Kira picked it up, looked at it, took a sip. Extra lime, she observed. He knows his audience, Mara said. The Delford Community Board voted the following month to establish a formal protected vendor and community wellness program for Calloway Park, a protected designation that guaranteed permitted vendors and nonprofit health clinics the legal right to operate without interference, backed by a revised enforcement protocol with the city's Parks Department. Mara had been asked to speak at the meeting where the vote was held. She almost said no. She had given enough accounts of things in the past 3 months, to attorneys, to police, to journalists, to federal investigators, and she was tired of hearing herself talk about her own story as if it were the point. She went because Owen asked her to, and because Dorothy said, if you don't go, I'll go, and I'll say all the things you would say better, and then you'll wish you'd gone, which was accurate. The chamber was smaller than she'd expected and more crowded. About 100 people in a room designed for 75, folding chairs brought in along the back and sides. She recognized faces. Felix in the third row. Sophia's family near the left aisle. Constance Briggs with her daughter, who had driven down from another state because her mother had called and said something was happening that she should be there for. 2 volunteers from the clinic. Derek Pallone in the back row with his parents, looking like someone still working out what kind of person the last 4 months had made him, which seemed like the right place to be at 23. Mara stood at the microphone for 45 seconds before she said anything, not because she was afraid, she was not afraid, but because she was working out what was actually true versus what was convenient to say. and she had never been willing to trade one for the other. She did not talk about her fighting career. She did not talk about what she was capable of physically or what she had chosen not to do in a parking garage or a park circle or anywhere else. She talked about the line at the tent. 14 people, she said. That's how many people were in line at our clinic the Saturday this started. Not a special day. Not an event. Just a regular Saturday. A retired postal worker trying to understand his discharge paperwork. A teenager with an inhaler she was using wrong. A woman named Constance who had questions about a medication but mostly just needed someone to sit with her for 20 minutes and ask about her cats. She paused. Those 14 people had the right to be there. They had permits, and they had need, and they had the same claim to that park as anyone else. And when someone decided those things were insufficient, decided that the people standing in that line were insufficient. The problem wasn't that I pushed back. The problem was that it took me pushing back to make it visible. She stopped there. She had more she could have said. She chose not to. The vote passed 9-2. The 2 who voted against it did not speak afterward. The 9 who voted for it looked like people who had needed this to be official before they fully believed it, which was its own kind of truth about how institutions worked and how long it took them to catch up to what was already obvious. Afterward, in the hallway outside the chamber, Sophia found her. She was taller than Mara remembered, or maybe she was just carrying herself differently, the way people do when they've had a few months to decide how to take up space after someone tried to shrink them. My dad wants to expand the stand, Sophia said. We're going to start carrying dried flowers too. He's been researching suppliers. That's good, Mara said. I've been thinking about what I want to do next year, after I graduate. Sophia looked at her steadily. I think I want to study public health, the community clinic thing, the way you had it set up. I want to know how to build that. Mara looked at her. She thought about 17-year-old Mara, who had walked into a gym because she needed somewhere to put the thing in her chest that didn't have a name yet. She thought about the person who had found her there and handed her not just a skill but a framework, a way of understanding what you were capable of when you stopped being afraid of your own capabilities. There's a nonprofit program at Delford State, Mara said. Owen Park runs it part-time. You should email him. Do you have his address? Mara got out her phone and sent it to the number Sophia held out. Thank you, Sophia said. Then, with the candor of a 17-year-old who hadn't yet learned to perform politeness over honesty. Were you scared? Any of it? Mara thought about the parking garage, the 2 men. The phone raised, the recording running, her weight on the balls of her feet, and 6 years of very still capability underneath that moment. Not the way they wanted me to be, she said. Sophia considered that. Nodded once. Okay, she said, like she was filing it somewhere useful. Conrad Wills went to trial 14 months later. Mara was not present for most of it. She had given her testimony in the form of a formal deposition and had been told by Rice that her in-court appearance would likely be brief. She testified for 40 minutes on a Wednesday morning in November, stated the facts of the park incident and the garage confrontation in precise sequence, answered opposing counsel's questions without becoming hostile or defensive, and was excused. She went back to work the same afternoon. She heard the verdict from Nadine 6 weeks later. Conrad Wills was convicted on 4 counts: wire fraud, bribery, obstruction, and conspiracy. The sentence would be determined at a hearing the following month. Aldous Greer had pleaded guilty to his charges 2 months into the trial, cooperated with prosecutors, and was awaiting his own sentencing. The 2 officials from the other cities had both pleaded before trial. Nadine delivered the news in a single-paragraph text, which was the right format for information that was significant without being surprising. Mara read it twice, sent back, "Thank you for everything," and went to check on her patient in Bay 3. She did not celebrate. She did not feel the specific relief of someone who had expected things to go wrong. The verdict was the correct outcome of evidence applied to law, applied to documented conduct. It was satisfying in the way that correct outcomes were satisfying. Not triumphant, just right. Garrett Wills's state trial ended 3 months after his father's. He was convicted of criminal harassment, vandalism, and criminal threatening. He received a suspended sentence, community service, and a permanent restraining order covering Calloway Park and the surrounding area. His lawyer called it disproportionate. His victims, which the record now formally included, by name, with documentation, did not. Patricia Wills was granted immunity for her cooperation. She was building a life in another city. Mara knew this from Nadine and from one message Patricia had sent in the spring, brief and plain. "I hope the park is doing well. I hope you are too." Mara replied, "Both. Thank you for what you did." That was the end of that conversation, and it felt complete. The following summer, on a Saturday in June that was genuinely perfect in the way that Delford may be managed twice a year, Mara arrived at Calloway Park at 8:30 in the morning to help Dorothy set up. The clinic had grown. There were 3 tents now instead of 2, and a 4th on the first Saturday of each month that ran a dedicated pediatric checkup program that a local pediatrician named Dr. Anaya volunteered for. The permit board had the new City Protected Program designation on it, a blue seal that meant something specific and enforceable, which was the difference between a piece of paper and a protection. Felix was already there with the fruit cups. He had started bringing extra because other volunteers had started showing up, and nobody wanted to feel left out. Dorothy accepted her cup with the particular grace of someone who had decided to allow small courtesies without making a production of them. The line started at 9 and ran until 1. At 11, a woman arrived with 2 children, a boy, maybe 5, and a girl who was 7, and asked Mara very directly why she was wearing the kind of shirt that had a badge on it. Was she a police officer or what? Mara explained that she was a nurse, which the girl received with the critical attention of someone updating a mental category. "My aunt's a nurse," the girl said. "Yeah?" Mara said. "Is she good at it?" The girl thought about it seriously. "She's okay," she said. "She knows a lot of stuff, but she also sometimes doesn't explain things right. You might be better." "I'll work on it," Mara said. She checked the girl's blood pressure and her brother's and found them both fine, which she reported with the same specificity she would have brought to any findings, because there was no medical reason to be less precise with children and several reasons to be more. At 1, they packed up. At 1:30, after most of the volunteers had gone, Mara sat on the bench by the fountain by herself for a while. She was 41 years old. She had been a nurse for 12 years and a fighter for 6 before that, and a person learning how to be both for all of the years since. She had $312 in her account that wasn't spoken for by rent and student loans, which had been exactly the number 2 years ago and was a fact she had made a kind of peace with. She lived 6 blocks from the hospital and walked the distance in all weather and knew the names of the people she walked past regularly and stopped to talk to them when they had time. She was not a particularly remarkable person to look at. She was not performing anything. She was not building toward anything that required a public narrative. She was just someone who showed up. That was the thing she had been trying to say at the community board meeting and had only half managed, the thing that was harder to put into language than it seemed like it should be. The most important thing she had ever done was not anything that happened in 2 months of legal fights and federal cases and public stories. It was the 6 years of Saturdays before any of that. The 14 people in the line that nobody was looking at. The blood pressure cuffs and the extra blankets and the 20 minutes with Constance Briggs asking about her cats. The crisis had made her visible, but what had been worth seeing was already there. A man couldn't look at that and call it harmless. He couldn't look at it and see nothing worth threatening. He had seen it, some version of it, and he had tried to eliminate it, which meant he had understood something about what it was, even while misunderstanding everything about who she was. You couldn't build the case that took down Conrad Wills without Mara Voss. But Mara Voss couldn't have stood still in that park without 14 people in a line on an ordinary Saturday, and she couldn't have stood still in that garage without 6 years of choosing, over and over, to be someone worth threatening. The pigeon landed near the fountain. She did not feed it because she had no food, but she watched it for a while. It was engaged in whatever urgent pigeon business required that particular patch of fountain edge, apparently unconcerned with anything else. She picked up her bag. She had a Sunday shift tomorrow, a full week after that. Dorothy had mentioned an expansion proposal for the 4th tent program that she wanted Mara to look over, and Mara had said she would, and she meant it. She had a call with Owen on Tuesday about the public health curriculum connection he was building with Delford State. Sophia had enrolled in the fall program, which Mara had learned from Owen's email, not from Sophia, which was exactly as it should be. She had patients who needed her. She had a job she was good at and intended to keep being good at. She had a phone number for Kira in her contacts that she now used for actual conversations instead of keeping at a distance like a door she wasn't sure she deserved to open. None of it was finished. Life wasn't structured that way. The problems didn't resolve and then stop. The people didn't become fixed versions of themselves. The institutions didn't transform and stay transformed without continued pressure. Conrad Wills would serve his sentence, and his properties would be sold or managed by someone else. And some of those decisions would be better, and some of them wouldn't. The Parks Department had new leadership, and time would tell what that meant. Derek Pallone was still figuring out who he wanted to be, which was appropriate for 23. The city moved the way cities moved, slowly, with friction, occasionally in the direction of something better. The thing Mara had learned, or had learned again, was that none of that uncertainty was an argument against showing up. It was just the conditions under which showing up happened. You didn't wait for certainty. You didn't wait for someone to tell you your presence was welcome. You arrived with your permit and your blood pressure cuff, and you set up and you took the next person in line. And if someone told you to move, you looked at them clearly and you stayed where you were because you knew exactly what you were capable of, and you had chosen this specific, ordinary, necessary work over everything that might have made you more visible and less useful. She walked out of Calloway Park through the east entrance, past the herb stand with its second table and its bundles of thyme and its new row of dried flowers, past the bench where a man was eating a sandwich and reading something on his phone, past the permit board with its blue seal, past the city camera on the light post that had recorded the moment everything started and would go on recording ordinary Saturdays long after any of this had receded into the background of a city that mostly didn't know it had happened. 6 blocks to home. She walked them in the summer light, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about the patient she hadn't been able to help enough last Thursday and what she might do differently, thinking about whether she had enough rice for the week and whether the cafe on Millard Street had started doing the iced coffee she'd liked and then discontinued, thinking about nothing remarkable at all. That was the whole of it. That had always been the whole of it. The most dangerous person in any situation is not the one performing strength. It's the one who knows exactly what they're carrying and chooses, every day, what to do with it. Mara Voss walked home. She was already thinking about Saturday.